Welcome. I am Cassandra Frederic, Executive Director of Drug Policy Alliance, an advocacy organization based in the United States. I'm honored to moderate this discussion today at the occasion of the launch of the Global Commission on Drug Policy's 10th anniversary report, Time to End Prohibition. Today's speakers are Helen Clark, who's the chair of the Global Commission since August 2020, former Prime Minister of New Zealand and UNDP Administrator, respected global leader on sustainable development, gender equality, and international cooperation. While New Zealand's Minister of Health, she supported the introduction of the second NSP in the world. Ruth Dreifuss is the former president of Switzerland. She chaired the commission between 2016 and 2020. Ruth Dreifuss has helped to design Switzerland's four-pillared strategy to drug policy. Juan Manuel Santos is one of the most active heads of states calling for drug policy since his tenure as president of Colombia. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for the signature of the historic peace agreement with the FARC. Olusegun Obasanjo served as Nigerian president from 1999 until 2007. He is also the chair of West Africa's Commission on Drugs, launched by Kofi Annan in 2014. Mohamed El Baradei is an advocate for peace, freedom, and democracy in the Arab world. He is Director General Emeritus of the International Atomic Energy Agency and served as Director General between 1997 and 2009. In 2005, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Under the leadership of President Fernando Henrique Cardoso from Brazil, the Global Commission was established in 2011 by political leaders, cultural figures, and globally influential personalities to contribute to the world debate on drug policy. Thank you everyone for being here. Commissioner Clark, can you tell us more about the Global Commission and the 5 pathways you all suggest?
I'm very honored to chair the Commission following Ruth Dreifuss and before Ruth, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who was the president of Brazil. We're a commission made up of eminent personalities, well-known public figures. They include Nobel laureates, and they include a number of former heads of state and government. And the aim was, from the very beginning in 2011, to bring scientific evidence to a discussion around drugs, which was until then really mainly oriented towards repressive approaches and based on quite wrong and outdated perceptions. So throughout the 10 years, the Commission has been putting forward good recommendations for change in line with 5 pathways to drug policies. And those are: always put people's health first. Nothing is more important than people, their health, their rights. Secondly, to prioritize access to essential controlled medicines. The current international drug regime makes this very difficult for many. Thirdly, stop criminalizing people who use drugs. We can speak more about that a bit later, but there are shocking figures for incarceration for people convicted of so-called drug offences. Fourth, we say refocus the finance on the organised criminal elites, not on ordinary people who happen to use drugs. And fifthly, we say regulate drug markets. Put governments in control of this. In effect, governments have abandoned the markets to organised crime. We say governments, do your job, regulate, get back in control yourselves. So that's the basis on which we've been working for this past 10 years. And as our report says, we've had some wins, we've had some slow points, but we feel the ground is shifting more towards the kind of evidence-based approach that we advocate.
So today marks the launching of the report titled Time to End Prohibition, that marks 10 years of the Global Commission. Madam Dreifuss, in the early years of the commission, I remember going to the premiere of a film called Breaking the Taboo. And that was like the beginning of the slogans for the commission. What is your impression on what you've seen in the last 10 years? Is there concern that the topic is not moving forward sufficiently? Is it still too controversial?
Let us first speak about the positive aspect of this 10 years history, and that is really that the taboo was broken. I mean, if I look back 10 years ago, drug policy was not a priority in most countries. It was not a priority on the international level. And the recognition, the awareness about the multiple harms caused by drug policy was not recognized. Now we are in a period, and it was a development along these 10 years, that recognized the negative aspect of drug policy, and we will speak about that later on. But I would say, yes, the taboo is broken. So now the debate, I would say, will be more oriented toward practical solution and a situation where reforms of the international level will be absolutely necessary.
This is a great point, Madam Dreyfus. I do think that their perspective and the conversation on drug policy has increased incredibly. Like, people are talking about it all over the world. Commissioner Obasanjo, together with Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations, you were one of the first African leaders to call on countries to address drug issues through a different lens. How has the discourse in Africa changed since then?
Well, thank you very much. When Kofi Annan, as a member of the Global Commission, realized that there's need for us to interrogate the situation in West Africa. And we came to the conclusion that the law that we have is harsh, very harsh. That was why we went around West Africa and got leaders to understand the situation as we found it.
So, Commissioner, would you say that your allies in drug policy have increased on the continent since you started on the Global Commission?
I can mention a number of countries where things have changed for the better. One country is Senegal, where they have paid a lot of attention to the health aspect. Ghana is another country that has done better. Even my own country, Nigeria, that was decriminalization and health and justice aspect.
President Santos, when we think about an ideal world, what do drug policies look like? And what do you see for your country as the largest producer of cocaine globally?
Until now, with prohibition, the drug traffickers, and I'm talking about the big fish, the big drug traffickers, have been the only winners in this war. And the most effective way to fight them is simply to end prohibition and regulate the market of drugs. And it is urgent because the more time we waste in this failed war on drugs that is based on prohibition, the stronger the mafias and the organized crime get. So we must act as soon as possible. And fortunately, people are starting to understand that. In that sense, we have made some progress. People are starting to say, yes, the war on drugs has failed and we need a new approach.
You know, President Santos, why should drugs be regulated? How could it contribute to peace building in the countries most harmed by prohibition?
We should regulate drugs because it is the only way to take away the money from the mafias, from the organized crime that has been growing because of prohibition. It's the only way. And we have seen how these mafias, this organized crime, are getting into other illegal businesses. So that is the reason why we should regulate the market, as it happened in the United States during prohibition. The mafias, in a way, disappeared there. We are in Colombia, and this is a perfect example, in the face of peace building after we signed the peace agreement with the FARC. The number one problem that we have right now is the violence that has been generated by the criminal groups that have been competing to take over the regions that have illegal crops. And so peace building and prohibition are a contradiction. That is why regulating the drug trafficking is a complement to any process of peace building. And again, Colombia is a perfect example.
You were one of the few presidents in office who supported courageous changes in the international drug control system while implementing national level reforms and the peace process. While president of Colombia, you called for the UNGAS 2016 on drugs and undertook drug policy reform advocacy in other UN high-level meetings. Have you witnessed any progress in Latin America in the last decades?
Latin America, and Colombia in particular, has been the region most harmed by prohibition. 42 out of the 50 most violent cities in the world are in the region, and it's because of the war on drugs. In terms of reforms, probably the only country who has advanced is Uruguay, which surprised us in 2013 when they regulated the consumption of marijuana. But besides Uruguay, very little progress. Some countries have regulated medical cannabis. Mexico right now is struggling to approve a law that would regulate recreational cannabis in Mexico. In Colombia, we have tabled quite a few laws that have not been approved. And on the contrary, what we see, unfortunately, in the region is not progress, but we're going back. In the case of Colombia or in the case of Brazil, to more repressive and more prohibition. That is the reality.
How does the Global Commission take into consideration the repression and the backlash that comes with our progress? What are the conversations like with other international decision makers?
I don't see too much backlash against the progress on average. I think that as countries inch forward with reforms, it tends to become established in the fabric of their laws and social practices and norms. I think more disturbing has been the further regression in countries which didn't have particularly enlightened policies anyway. And you look to countries with populist leaders who then encourage extrajudicial action against the small person, the person who uses drugs, the small street seller. There's some pretty horrific things that have gone on. So we have to keep to course and keep advocating for human rights-based approaches and aim just to keep that steady rolling on of more countries exploring ways of basing their drug policy on health and on human rights.
I think that's such a great reframe, right? where it's less of a backlash and more of a regression for places that have not already accepted reform. And I appreciate that reframe, because I think that's exactly right, and makes the work of advocates on the ground in those countries even more critical, and for people in the international community to be supporting advocates in countries that are navigating authoritarianism and regressive drug policies.
We can speak really about a blockade in reforms on the international level, because the conventions still are the rule of the international system. And this blockade has to be overcome. And that will be the task also of the Global Commission on Drug Policy to create really the momentum for changes in the legal framework, in the international legal framework. And we are helping countries who want to make reforms on the ground. But to allow this movement to continue, we need to change the general frame of international legislation. And that is really our message that we are giving after 10 years, supporting reforms all over the world.
I think this point that you're saying is right, Madam Dreyfus. And, I want to bring you into this conversation, Director Albarrade. You are a Nobel Prize laureate, as well as President Santos, who's also on our commission, and an advocate for people-centered policies, particularly in the Middle East and Northern Africa. How has the general frame that Madam Dreyfus just talked about evolved in the last decade? What are some of the things that you see that have progressed, and in what areas?
We are a group of people who see a policy that is completely irrational, that has an awful impact on the human dignity and health of people. So we are going against the tide. We are very much against the tide, and that takes time. We expect backlash, we expect resistance. We are all come from background, we are used to that. But we believe we are on the right track, because it doesn't make sense. What we are really looking at is change of a mindset. It's a change of a mindset. Moving from crime and punishment into respecting people's health, respecting human dignity, respecting development aspirations. But if I come to the Middle East and North Africa, this is an area when the mindset is still on lock them up. They are criminal, let us lock them up. This is a microcosm of a larger mindset we see in different parts of the world. Is it working? Of course it's not. Third of the people in prison there are drug related. There is a lot of consumption. It's a hub for trafficking from Central Asia, a hub of trafficking within the region, and people are stigmatized. People who use drugs are stigmatized, are looked down at. So the situation there is not really great. It hasn't moved much, but I think I see sometimes little lights. People started to look at harm reduction, in Lebanon, in Iran, in Morocco, one of the largest production countries of cannabis, but they're now looking into how to regulate cannabis for medical reason, for industrial reason. So there is a very slow progress, but it's all again affected. What's going to happen in the Middle East, in my view, and North Africa is impacted by what's going in the US or in Canada. When I see countries now are moving into legalizing cannabis in many parts of the world, I'm sure that will have an impact on the Middle East and North Africa. People will think, there is a different approach. Maybe we look at it. Because our approach, the bottom line, the writing on the wall, the current approach is not working. More people are are using drugs, more people are being incarcerated, and the whole idea of war on drugs, which we have been going on for what, 50, 60 years, is zilch, doesn't do anything good. So we are not in the best shape in the Middle East and North Africa, but I think, in my view, there is a beginning of a change, and the more things will happen around the world, the more we'll see leaders in this area.
You know, in the report, the Commission talks about how the regime created by the international system was done without scientific assessment, but under the influence of racism and the prejudices from the colonial era. We know that people of African descent outside of the continent are experiencing this. And so what would you say as a commissioner on how we would address these harms?
Well, I believe, first of all, awareness. Another thing we must admit, and if we don't admit this, we are just deceiving ourselves, there's discrimination. And discrimination based on color. We need to educate ourselves.
I think this point is exactly right about the reframing. You know, I want to move into this conversation around the international impacts. And in the report, you all acknowledge the total failure of the current international control framework, calling it a recipe for failure. So, Madam Clark, what is wrong with the international system?
What's wrong is that the UN conventions are a major, major problem. And that's what the repressive prohibition approaches, the war on drugs, are based on. So the conventions are, as Ruth said, a blockage, a blockade on sensible policy. And the objectives that then the international system has set itself around reducing significantly or eliminating altogether drug use and supply, it's impossible ever to achieve these objectives. What we see, rather than progress towards the targets that are set in international meetings, is that production, trafficking, consumption, it goes up every year. It doesn't reduce, it doesn't eliminate. Now, this has got to tell you that something is rather wrong about the whole approach. We also say that the evidence shows that the current approaches have generated a tremendous amount of violence, actually a militarized response to drugs in some countries, but serious repression even without military in others. And there's been great harm caused to so many people. And as well, because the whole ambience around drugs has been driven into the illegal markets, it's made organised crime very rich and very powerful. I wouldn't have thought that was a desired outcome of any rational approach to drugs. If we look at the harms to people, we've seen an increase in deaths related to the use of drugs of around 60% between the years 2000 and 2015. We're seeing around 80% of the world's population left without proper access to the pain relief that they need because of the approach taken to drugs under the international conventions. And then we have to underline that the prison sentencing for these so-called drug offences, often for the person who's using drugs, the small-scale seller, these are wildly disproportionate sentences. There's other vicious sentences like the judicial corporal punishment, caning, whipping. There's over-imprisonment of people who use drugs. 1 in every 5 prisoners jailed around our world is there for a so-called drug offence. And as I said earlier, we've seen this rash of extrajudicial killings promoted by populist politicians. So there's only one way to describe the international system and what it's created. And that is, it's a disaster. And that's why we come back to evidence and reason and being human rights and health based in our approach to say we just have to do better than this as a human community.
That's exceptional. I really appreciate that, Commissioner. So, Commissioner El-Baradei, what would you say is the Global Commission's recipe for success?
The Global Commission is trying to align drug policy with the reality on the ground. At one point, Cassandra, torture was allowed, slavery was allowed. I mean, our values evolve when we learn, and we are learning a lot about drugs that had nothing to do with the convention that was concluded in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
How do you think the Commission and advocates can work or be in more alignment?
We need to go out and spread the gospel, if you like. I think that's very important. We need to use influencers. We need to get people to say, this is not the way we go, and we are there to help.
Thank you for that. It's actually quite difficult to believe that such a system has been so difficult to respond to what we're seeing, which makes it even more important for different international leaders to come together to push and to create the mechanisms for us to be having the debates that you all have been having for the last 10 years and what we're talking about right now. I'm going to ask the lawyer in the room again, Director El-Baradei. We're seeing countries move beyond the drug control conventions as a necessary step to protect the rights of their citizens and to adapt more comprehensive and humane approaches to drug issues. We're seeing this as the countries that you were saying. There are countries all over the world, Canada, Uruguay, the US, who are pushing forward policies that are in direct conflict with these treaties. Several strategic litigation cases denounced the many human rights violations originated from the application of our drug control laws. As a lawyer, what is your view?
As a lawyer, we have a winnable case. There is a miscarriage of justice, and we need to fix that. It's our duty to fix that. Not just as lawyers, but as human beings. We need to fix this miscarriage of justice.
Madam Dreyfus, you and I have talked before when you've visited the States about your experience. I had great conversations with you when you visited the States, and we were talking to Mayor Myrick in Ithaca, who, like you, understood that our policies were not working, and was in an executive position to put forward different strategies. For you, Switzerland was one of the first countries to adopt harm reduction services when you were at the front of the Swiss response. At the time, back in the 80s, these services were seen as a possible violation of UN conventions, an argument still used by many countries trying to deny life-saving services to their populations. What is the Commission's position regarding the upholding of international law and the need to address harms resulting from the implementation of drug control conventions?
At the beginning, all this innovation were considered at the margin of what could a country do in respect of the convention. And it was really a struggle step by step to show that this is in harmony with the convention because there is a rule also allowing the countries to do some special laws to protect the health of their population. And that is the first priority, I would say, for any government to look for life and safety and health. So I would say the influence of rigid convention was twofold. On one side, it was the whole philosophy of the convention, the illusion that we can create a drug-free society, the idea that drugs are just an evil and that people who find perhaps in drugs some satisfaction, some healing, some socializing event are just bad people. So, I mean, it was the whole philosophy of the convention that refrained country to do the necessary steps and to encourage them to choose repression of the solution. And this has, in a certain way, known a certain evolution. Many countries have adopted such kind of measures in the time. But the convention still are absolutely convinced, or it is really written in stone, that regulation, state regulation of drugs is not allowed. State regulation of drugs is beyond the convention. The characteristic of the substances are absolutely without scientific basis, so that you put under a strong control substances that do not deserve that. On the other side, you have a strong obligation to prohibit the use of drugs if it is not medical or in a scientific experiment. So this is, there is, as I said before, a twofold blockade. One is on the philosophical point of view, the idea about what drugs are, what drug users are, and everything is bad in this field, and the regulation itself, which is great obstacles to really put health and safety first.
I've heard your story before, but I think I'm always so taken by it because it takes an incredible amount of courage to be in a position to actually do the things that you think are necessary. And I think you do not believe that. No.
It was not a matter of courage. It was a matter of an emergency, of absolute need to save the lives of the people from overdoses, from the contamination with AIDS, with hepatitis, to calm also the surge of violence that was inside this sphere of consumption, to explain to the people what is the reality. So it was not courage. It was just a duty, and I would say, most importantly, it needs two things: working with the scientific community and explaining to the people what the reality was. So pedagogic tools were more important than courage.
Well, that is very helpful for heads of state to hear that it's not about courage, it's about actually just looking at what is in front of you and moving forward with clarity and conviction. You know, one of the things that was really exciting, I think, for a lot of people was when the Global Commission came out for the regulation of all drugs. I think a lot of people could never imagine a time where we would have multiple former heads of state come together and say, we should regulate drugs, that is what we need to do in order for us to really navigate what is in front of us. And, Madam Clark, the Global Commission has been at the forefront of innovations in drug policy since its creation. In the current report, you recommend the establishment of a WHO-mandated body to ensure adequate access to essential controlled medicines, as well as having the World Health Assembly become the legal authority on scheduling decisions. This is really interesting. As someone who is consistently fighting with the scheduling decisions in my country, can you speak more to like, how was this developed? How did y'all get to this recommendation?
For so long now, the current UN approach to drug control was concentrated in Vienna at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC for short. Now, thanks to some, I think, very effective advocacy from the Global Commission when Ruth was leading it, there was a lot of discussion about the UN taking on a common policy on drugs. And the current Secretary General was associated with very progressive policy on drugs in Portugal when he was Prime Minister there. And so eventually the UN system adopted a common position on drugs. And that's been a bit of an opening to work to bring other agencies, apart from UNODC, into the frame. So yes, our Commission thinks, and we say it in this report, that the WHO should be the lead, should have the authority to be making the decisions on what is scheduled and how it's scheduled. These should be evidence, scientific, health-based decisions, not politicized decisions in the ambience of the UNODC. Currently, the World Health Organization has only quite a limited role in scheduling of substances. It has an expert committee on drug dependence, which can provide non-binding recommendations. We don't think that's good enough. We say hand this role over to the World Health Organization, which is driven by its mandate for global health for all. And it would help just in so many ways, including in ensuring that people who need access to essential controlled medicines can actually get it.
That is a really exciting recommendation. And it really, your point, I want to underline your point around moving the decisions around scheduling into a space outside of political motivations to one around science. So commissioners, in closing, in 2 words, what do you think should be the priorities for drug policy over the next 10 years, President Santos?
Number 1, do away with prohibition. And number 2, much more cooperation among different countries to fight the big drug lords.
Helen Clark.
Stop prohibition.
Madam Dreyfus.
Drug issue is concerning all aspects of the life of a society. It cannot be isolated just in putting the substance in the center. The people are in the center.
Commissioner El-Baradei.
Listen to science.
That's a good one. Listen to science. Olusegun Obasanjo.
We should find a better way. And in countries where they have attempted to find better ways, they have got better results. And that too should be what we should be saying and what we should be doing in the next 10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Clark, I'll yield the floor to you to close us out.
I think over the past 10 years, the Commission has played an important role in helping to change the narrative around drug policy. I'm not discouraged, I'm encouraged, because I see countries working on reform and others interested. I do want to see an end to prohibition. I want to see an end to the criminalization of people who use drugs. And I really do want to see, well within my lifetime, drug policy based on human rights and health considerations and not on repression. So it's that vision which inspires me to keep going, and I hope will inspire all commissioners to keep putting an effort into this cause.
Thank you so much again to all the commissioners for being here today. This was an incredibly dynamic conversation. This was a great moment. 10 years has been a great long time for us to talk about this, and we have a lot more work to do in the next 10 years. So the commissioners have done their work. I'm speaking directly to the civil societies, the community that I'm a part of. We have a lot of work to do, and we need to increase the conversation, increase awareness, and move forward. 10 years, it's drug war reparation. Thank you for watching.